In the quiet hours before dawn, a woman named Clara James staggered out of her home with one hand pressed against her stomach and the other gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles whitened. A thin fog hung over the street, and the air felt cold enough to sting her throat as she whispered to herself, "Please, just let my baby be okay." She had no shoes on, no jacket, only an oversized nightshirt soaked with tears and something she refused to look at. Neighbors would later say they had never heard such a sound come from a human being, half cry, half plea, the sound of a mother trying to protect a life that hadn't even had a chance to take its first breath. And as she stumbled down that lonely sidewalk, one question kept echoing in her mind: how did my life reach this point? Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Clara had once believed her story would be simple: a loving marriage, a warm home, a child to cherish. But that night, just hours before she appeared on the street barefoot and trembling, something happened behind her front door that would change the course of her life forever. What pushed a gentle woman into the darkness of early morning? What broke inside a man who once promised to protect her? And what truth would her mother uncover when she arrived at that house, a truth that would leave even the police questioning everything they thought they knew? As we unfold Clara's journey piece by piece, you'll see how a single moment can reveal what a person is truly capable of. But you'll also learn how one mother's courage can become the turning point that saves more than just one life. Before everything changed, Clara lived a life that many would call ordinary but beautiful. She worked part-time at a small craft store, the kind filled with wooden trinkets and the smell of cinnamon candles. Her husband, Ethan, worked long shifts as a delivery driver. He wasn't perfect, but in the early years, he was the kind of man who kissed her forehead before leaving for work and sent her photos of sunsets he caught on the road. Their home was modest, with a narrow porch and a yard that always grew patches of dandelions. When Clara found out she was pregnant, she cried in her mother's arms. Her mother, Marjorie, had raised Clara alone and worried about everything, yet even she admitted she had never seen her daughter glow the way she did during those first months. Back then, hope felt easy. But time has a way of revealing what people hide. As the pregnancy progressed, Ethan began returning home later and later. Sometimes he'd walk in with the smell of cigarettes and sweat on his clothes, even though he didn't smoke. Other nights he'd sit alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing, flinching when Clara tried to touch his shoulder. She asked softly, "Are you okay?" But he always replied the same way, "I'm fine, Clara. Don't start." At her prenatal appointments, Clara found herself lying to the nurse when asked if everything at home felt safe. She didn't want to believe anything was wrong. She told herself pregnancy stress could change a man. She told herself it would pass. But there were moments, brief ones, when she'd catch a look in Ethan's eyes and feel a sharp unease she couldn't explain to anyone. One week before the night everything shattered, Marjorie noticed something odd during a phone call. Clara's voice trembled, just slightly, as she said she was a little tired. When Marjorie pressed for more, Clara quickly changed the subject. And that was when Marjorie felt the weight of a truth she had been trying to ignore: something was changing in her daughter's home, something she couldn't yet see but could feel in her bones. Meanwhile, inside the house, Clara tried to keep peace. She cooked dinner, folded laundry, and read baby books out loud so the baby could hear her voice. Ethan would sit nearby, silent, distant, clenching his jaw at sounds only he could hear. The night before everything happened, he punched a hole through the pantry door after dropping a glass. Clara cleaned the shards while he mumbled an apology she couldn't believe. The following evening, Clara's world finally snapped. What began as a small argument, about a missed appointment Ethan promised he'd attend, slowly grew into something more dangerous. Clara stepped back, her hands instinctively shielding her stomach. Ethan's breathing changed, and something in his expression made her heart race. She whispered, "Please, let's talk about this tomorrow." But the moment those words left her lips, Ethan stepped forward, and that decision would send shockwaves through every corner of their lives. By the time the house fell silent again, Clara knew nothing would ever return to what it once was. And hours later, when neighbors finally saw her outside, bruised and trembling, they had no idea what her mother was about to uncover, something that would leave the entire community speechless. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following till the end. Marjorie arrived at the house just as the sun began to rise. She had received Clara's broken whisper over the phone, "Mom, I need you," and drove faster than she had in years. When she reached the porch and saw the state of the front door, she stopped breathing. The frame was cracked, and the floor inside was scattered with pieces of a lamp Clara had once loved. Marjorie stepped inside cautiously, calling her daughter's name. The quiet was unsettling, the kind that makes your chest feel tight. Then she saw Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, murmuring words she couldn't understand. But what Marjorie found upstairs, what she discovered in that bedroom, would force her to confront a truth she never imagined she'd face. And what she chose to do next would shock everyone who later heard the story. When Marjorie reached the top of the stairs, her hands shook so badly she had to grip the railing to steady herself. She whispered her daughter's name once more, terrified of what she might see. The bedroom door was half open, and inside, Clara sat against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, her face streaked with tears and the faintest trace of fear she could no longer hide. Her voice cracked when she said, "Mom, I didn't know where else to go." Marjorie didn't ask what happened, not yet. She simply wrapped her arms around her trembling daughter and felt the small flutter of the unborn child pressed between them. It was then she realized this moment wasn't just about protecting Clara, it was about protecting a life that hadn't even opened its eyes. And deep inside, Marjorie felt something shift, an instinct stronger than fear, stronger than caution, stronger than doubt. When Clara finally gathered the courage to speak, her words came out in fragments. He snapped, it wasn't like before. She looked down at the bruise forming along her arm and winced when she touched it. Marjorie listened, fighting to keep her breathing steady as her daughter described how a simple argument had turned into something violent. But then Clara revealed something that caught even her mother off guard. She whispered, "He wasn't angry at me, he was angry at the baby." Marjorie froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. Clara continued, her eyes distant, "He kept saying he wasn't ready. That he never asked for this." A cold silence settled between them as Marjorie realized this wasn't just an accident or a moment of weakness. There was a deeper fear inside Ethan, one Clara had never understood. And now, that fear had nearly destroyed them both. As Marjorie prepared to take Clara to the hospital, she found something that made her heart drop. On the edge of the dresser sat a small folder Clara had tried to hide. Papers spilled out, documents she hadn't had the strength to explain. Inside were unpaid bills, letters from Ethan's employer, and notices she'd never seen before. But one paper stopped her cold, a termination letter. Ethan had lost his job 3 months earlier. Clara hadn't known. Marjorie immediately understood what this meant. The sudden late nights, the distant behavior, the outbursts he couldn't explain, they weren't random. They were the signs of a man losing control of his life and refusing to admit it. Clara whispered, "Mom, he lied to me." And Marjorie answered gently, "People lie when they're ashamed, but shame doesn't excuse hurting you." At that moment, she knew she had to take action, no matter the consequences. At the hospital, doctors rushed Clara through a series of tests. Marjorie sat in the waiting room gripping a paper cup of cold coffee, replaying every moment of the morning in her mind. When the nurse finally returned, she placed a hand on Marjorie's shoulder and said, "The baby is still okay, but your daughter needs rest and safety." Those words, "need safety," echoed like a warning. When Clara was brought back into the room, she looked calmer, though exhaustion clung to her features. Marjorie sat beside her and said softly, "We're not going back there. Not tonight. Not for a while." Clara nodded, relief mixing with sadness. She still loved Ethan, but love wasn't enough to place herself or her child in danger. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life without constantly trying to hold everything together. A life where survival came first. Later that evening, after returning to Marjorie's home, Clara sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. She stared at the sunset, its warm colors stretching across the sky like a reminder that even after the darkest night, morning always returned. Marjorie joined her quietly. After a while, Clara said, "I thought staying would fix him." Marjorie nodded slow and gentle. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't holding on, it's stepping away." Clara rested her hand on her stomach. "I want this child to grow up in a home filled with peace." Her mother replied, "Then tonight is the first step." It wasn't an easy truth, nor was it a simple solution. But it was the beginning of healing, of choosing safety, choosing future, choosing life. And as the wind rustled the trees above them, Clara realized courage didn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispered, "Enough." Before we wrap up this part of the story, I want to ask you something directly. If you were in Clara's shoes, frightened, expecting a child, unsure who to trust, what would you have done? Would you have left sooner? Would you have tried to save the person hurting you? Or would you have waited for a sign strong enough to push you out the door? Stories like this aren't just tales, they're reflections of real choices many people face in silence. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what your heart says. And if you're still watching, write, "I'm still watching," so we know you're walking with us through every moment. And don't forget, if you haven't yet, click the subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter of these powerful, life-changing stories. The following morning, Clara woke to the quiet hum of her mother's old refrigerator and the soft sunlight drifting in through the curtains. For a moment, she forgot everything, forgot the fear, the bruises, the shattered pieces of her life left on that bedroom floor. But when she shifted her weight and felt the soreness along her ribs, reality returned like a cold shadow. Marjorie entered the room carrying a glass of water and her daughter's prenatal vitamins. Clara tried to sit up, whispering, "I don't know what to do next." Marjorie placed the glass on the nightstand and said gently, "First, you recover. Then we decide everything else." But deep inside, Marjorie already knew what she had to do. She had spent the night lying awake, replaying the terrified sound of Clara's voice on the phone. A mother's instinct doesn't wait for permission. It acts when a threat has crossed the line. Later that afternoon, while Clara rested, Marjorie stepped outside to clear her thoughts. The neighborhood was calm, birds chirping, sprinklers misting the lawns, children riding bicycles down the sidewalk. Yet Marjorie felt a heaviness in her chest, as if her heart were carrying more than one burden at once. She knew Ethan might come looking for Clara. She also knew that Clara, despite everything, still felt torn. Love doesn't disappear overnight, even when pain forces itself in. Marjorie stood on her porch and stared at the horizon as she whispered to herself, "I can't let him hurt her again. Not now. Not ever." She pulled out her phone, dialed a number she never thought she'd have to call, and asked to speak with an officer she trusted from years back. She didn't tell Clara about the call, not yet. She wanted her daughter to heal first, without fear of what might come next. Just as Marjorie feared, Ethan arrived 2 days later. His truck pulled up so silently that even the birds seemed to pause. Marjorie was in the kitchen when she heard a soft knock, 3 slow taps, the kind that signaled hesitation rather than demand. She opened the door to find Ethan standing on the porch with a defeated look she had never seen before. His face was unshaven, his eyes swollen from lack of sleep, and his voice low when he said, "Is she here?" Marjorie didn't answer right away. She studied him carefully, trying to determine whether he came in anger or remorse. Ethan swallowed hard. "I messed up," he whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness, I need to see if she's okay." Marjorie stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "Ethan," she said firmly, "you need to understand something before we go any further." And he froze, waiting. Ethan lowered his gaze as if bracing himself for the truth he already knew. Marjorie spoke slowly, choosing every word with the weight of a mother protecting her child. Clara is safe here. But she cannot see you right now. What happened in that house wasn't just a mistake, it was a breaking point. Ethan wiped his face with shaking hands. I didn't mean to hurt her. I swear. I just felt everything slipping away. The job. The bills. The baby coming. I didn't know how to tell her I failed. Marjorie let him speak, though the memory of Clara's bruises made her heart clench. I lost control, he admitted. And when I saw her fall, I realized what I'd done. I realized I wasn't the man I thought I was. His voice cracked, and for the first time, Marjorie saw not anger, but a man drowning in remorse and fear. Ethan took a deep breath. Please, let me apologize to her. Let me at least tell her I'm getting help. Marjorie stood very still. She understood pain, she understood regret, but she also understood danger. And sometimes danger comes wearing the face of someone you once trusted. She reached into her pocket, and Ethan watched her slowly pull out her phone. Ethan, she said quietly, what happens next isn't to punish you. It's to protect her, and that child. Before he could respond, a police car turned the corner and stopped in front of the house. Ethan's eyes widened with shock. Marjorie, what did you do? She looked him straight in the eyes. What I had to. For my daughter. As officers stepped out of the vehicle, Ethan didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply lowered his head as if accepting a truth he had known would come eventually. Inside the house, Clara heard the voices outside and slowly approached the window. When she saw Ethan speaking with officers, her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling her baby move gently beneath her fingertips. A part of her still cared for him, she couldn't deny that. But another part of her, stronger now than ever, understood that love doesn't erase danger. Love doesn't erase fear. Love doesn't erase responsibility. Marjorie entered the room quietly and wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. You did what you had to do, Clara whispered. No, Marjorie replied softly. I did what any mother would do. Outside, Ethan looked up at the window, and for a moment, their eyes met. Clara didn't wave. She didn't turn away, either. She simply stood there, accepting the ending neither of them had wanted but both of them needed. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to settle. Clara attended counseling, met with a support group, and focused on her pregnancy with more strength than she knew she had. Ethan entered a rehabilitation program offered by the court and began confronting the issues he had ignored for years. Nothing about their journey was easy. Nothing was simple. But for the first time in a long time, Clara felt safe. And when her baby arrived, a healthy, bright-eyed daughter, Marjorie held her and whispered, "You were the reason your mother found her courage." Clara realized then that healing doesn't always come from forgetting. Sometimes it comes from acknowledging the truth, taking the hard steps, and surrounding yourself with people who refuse to let you fall. And in that small, peaceful hospital room, she understood something powerful: protecting herself had protected her child, and that was the beginning of a new life. As we close this story, I want to ask you something deeply personal. If you were in Clara's shoes, or Marjorie's, what do you think your heart would have told you to do? Would you have had the courage to walk away? Would you have found the strength to call for help? Or would you have needed someone else, like Marjorie, to step in and protect you? Your thoughts matter, because stories like this reflect real people and their hidden battles. Share your reflections below, and tell us, what part of this story touched you the most? And if you've stayed with us all the way to the end, write, "I'm still watching," in the comments so we know you were here for every moment. And don't forget, subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next powerful story that just might change someone's life.